Join from the waiting room. So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining tonight. So tonight's webinar is titled Your Water, Your Questions, PFAS, Microplastics, and Fluoride. My name is Catherine Horn. I am a Senior Community Affairs Representative with EBMUD. I work in our Public Affairs Office, and I oversee our education program. And so tonight, we're going to be talking about a lot of the questions that we hear within the community about what is in your water and what's being done to keep it safe. From headlines about forever chemicals like PFAS to concerns about microplastics in the environment and ongoing questions about fluoride, there's a lot of information out there, and it can be hard to know what is fact and what is a myth. So tonight, we're here to try to clear some of that up. You're going to be hearing directly from local and state water quality experts about what's in your water, how it's tested, what regulations apply, and what steps are being taken every day to ensure your water and your wastewater meet the highest safety standards. So we really want you to leave this webinar tonight feeling informed and confident about the quality of your water and East Bay Med's ability to protect the San Francisco Bay, and to know exactly where to go with any questions in the future. So tonight, we're honored to have an excellent panel of experts with us. We're going to be starting with Susan Teefy, Manager of Water Quality for East Bay Mud. We're going to be then hearing from Marco Pacheco, Senior Water Resource Control Engineer with the California Water Board's Division of Drinking Water, and Amit Mutsuddy, Director of Wastewater at East Bay Mud. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. So by being present tonight, you are consenting to be recorded. Your questions will be recorded. The recording is going to be available on our website at ebmud.com/waterwednesday, usually within about a week of the recording. It's also available on East Bay Med's YouTube channel. And we also encourage you to submit questions at any time using the question and answer feature at the bottom of the webinar. We'll be doing our best to answer some of them as we go, and we'll be flagging some that we can ask at the question and answer session at the end of the webinar. If we don't get to your questions tonight, because we typically get quite a few and we don't always get to all of them, or if you think of something later, please feel free to email us at waterwednesday@ebmud.com. So with that, let's dive in. I'm going to hand it over to our first presenter, Susan Teefy.
Thanks, Catherine. I'm always happy to talk about my favorite subject, water quality at East Bay Mud. So we'll jump into the first slide. In order to understand water quality here, it's important to understand where your water comes from. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Basically, it's snowmelt and rainfall. About 90% of our water comes from the McKellamie River watershed up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. That picture on the top there is just a little slice of our pretty well protected watershed. And the remainder is from our local East Bay watersheds. And that picture at the bottom is the Upper San Leandro Reservoir. These watersheds are pretty well protected. You'll notice in pictures like this, there's not a lot of people. And there certainly are no major industries or sources of pollution. And that'll become important as we talk a little bit about PFAS. Next slide. In addition to protecting the watershed, we do a lot of treatment processes before we deliver the water to our customers. Each one of these little boxes represents a different treatment process that we do at our plants. We filter all of the water to remove particulate material. All the water is disinfected to kill microorganisms, pathogens, that could make people sick. At some of our plants, we use ozone that destroys taste and odor causing compounds. We add fluoride at all of our plants, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then we adjust the water chemistry to minimize corrosion as the water travels through the pipes. So we have a lot of really well-trained and really hardworking staff treating the water and protecting the watershed and maintaining the high water quality. Next slide. So zooming in to PFAS, the also known as forever chemicals. Next slide. PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. It's a really large group of compounds. There are thousands of them that have been identified. We don't even have, oops, there you go. We don't have analytical methods even to detect all of them, but there are many of them that are available. These are not naturally occurring. These are human-made materials. They have really interesting properties, stain resistant, oil resistant, water resistant, which is why we use them in so many different things. And this graph here just shows a few of the uses of them, from things like makeup, suntan lotion, sunblock, rainproof rain gear like Gore-Tex, nonstick pans. PFAS film is what keeps your hamburger grease from soaking through your paper wrapper that it's in. Pizza boxes are coated with PFAS. They're literally used in hundreds of different products and have been since about the 1940s. They're very ubiquitous in the built environment. And those standard water treatment processes that I talked about do not remove PFAS. If they're coming into our watershed, they would go right through our existing processes. Okay, next slide. Zooming down a little bit, and this is one that definitely was in the news a lot. I'm going to talk a little bit about a case study in North Carolina in the Cape Fear River. This was an industrial source of PFAS pollution. This map here shows the Cape Fear River. It sort of goes from north to south across the state. And in Fayetteville, there is an industrial facility, formerly DuPont, now they're called Chemours, that for decades discharged waste into the river that contained PFAS. And in 2017, they discovered PFAS in the drinking water that affected Wilmington out sort of on the coast downstream. And about 1.5 million people, about the size of EBMUD, were impacted. The concentrations of PFAS they found in that water were hundreds and sometimes thousands of times higher than these new drinking water standards that I'll talk about in a little bit. But it was a really significant industrial discharge and subsequent pollution. They did have to install advanced treatment processes after their conventional treatment process. They put in activated carbon basins, and that utility has filed a lawsuit to try to recover the cost from Chemours. Next slide. So zooming back out, in 2024, EPA did finalize new regulations for 6 individual PFAS compounds. Prior to that, there weren't any nationwide standards. There were some individual state standards, like in North Carolina, for example, but there weren't any standards on a national level. There's a program ongoing right now from 2023, or sorry, starting in 2023 and running through the end of this year, that requires all drinking water systems to test and report on 29 individual PFAS compounds. We've completed our monitoring under that program. We didn't find any in our drinking water under this program. And I just checked, EPA has a data finder that you can use under this sampling effort, and they are estimating right now 8.5% of all systems nationwide have one or more PFAS compounds higher than these new standards that EPA just relatively recently promulgated. So that's good news in a sense. I mean, that's 91.5% of systems that don't have PFAS above that standard, including systems like EBMUD. So generally speaking, drinking water is not a significant source of PFAS in humans. But it's out there. And I pulled a quote here from the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry that basically says most people in the US have been exposed to PFAS, really through all of those different routes of exposure that we saw in that graphic. Since 1999, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey has measured blood in PFAS of the US population, and nearly all people in the US have some amount of PFAS in their blood. It's around us, and it's a global problem. So all of that said, it's not common in our drinking water, but we have detected small amounts of it in our local East Bay creeks. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Next slide. So we've been going out, like I said, we didn't find any in the finished drinking water under this monitoring program, but we've been aggressively going out into our watersheds and looking for individual creeks that feed into our local reservoirs to see if we have any localized sources of PFAS. A watershed basically is just a line that you draw, and all the rain that falls within that line drains into our particular reservoirs or lakes. So these blue dashed lines are our watershed boundaries, and the little circles are where we're monitoring. So we're going out into the watershed and taking some samples in the field. And what we're finding is that in these in areas where there are more people, and so I've drawn some circles here around the town of Orinda and the town of Moraga. The orange dots are where we do see some detectable PFAS compounds in the creeks that drain through those areas. And then the green dots are, we're not finding any, basically. So that's parts of our watershed that are unhabitated, if you will. They're East Bay parks or open land that doesn't have any sources of PFAS. So generally speaking, the town's stormwater, just the detritus of humans that drains, as the rainwater falls and drains into the creeks, that does come into our watershed. But dilution is really important. So we have some water with low levels of PFAS coming in, and then we have other water with no PFAS coming in. And the bottom line is what we pull out to treat in our treatment plants already meets the EPA, the new EPA standards. So we don't think that we're going to have to make any modifications to our treatment plants. But we're going to continue monitoring it and keeping an eye on it, and making sure that that the levels don't exceed the new standards. Next slide. So shifting gears to microplastics. Next slide. These are small, tiny pieces of plastic, generally less than 5 millimeters. This is a really emerging field of study. We know much less about them than we do about PFAS. They can come from a variety of sources, breakdown of larger plastic debris that gets into the environment, and also some direct inputs like exfoliants and health and beauty products that have micro beads in them. Fortunately, most of those were banned in about 2015 in the US, but a lot of that stuff is still out there. There's different methods available for collecting samples, and those methods continue to undergo revision. But basically, the various studies are indicating basically that these things are in most ecosystems, and there are other studies that have been finding them throughout the human body. And there are various types of health effects that have been observed in cell cultures and animal models. And like I said, it's an ongoing field of research. There's a lot of interesting work that's going on right now. Next slide. So in terms of what we're doing in California, there's a state law that was passed in 2018 that required the State Water Board to do 5 things, basically. Number one, adopt a definition, because not everybody uses the same terminology, and that is done. I'm not going to show it. It's about a page long. It's really complicated. But that definition on a statewide basis of what we mean by microplastics in drinking water is finished. The state's supposed to adopt a standard methodology for testing drinking water, and that is nearly done. There are a couple of different analytical methods that have been approved for use in laboratories, and then there are sampling protocols that we will use to collect those samples that are still being refined, but they're almost done. The state has to certify environmental laboratories to do the testing, so we have a place that we can all take our samples to, or places. And there are a handful of labs that have been certified already. And then the next step is for the states to require the water systems to do 4 years of testing and disclose those results to the public. And that hasn't happened yet. We will probably be required to start testing as soon as the rest of the sampling protocols get worked out. And I expect that's going to be pretty soon. It looks to me like they're nearly done with that. And you'll hear a little bit more about that when we hear from our state representative in a minute. And then the last part is to consider issuing health-based guidance to aid consumers in interpreting the results. And that is a little farther down the road. The studies that are assessing the health effects are still in progress right now. Next slide. So in terms of what we're doing, we are actively participating in these various studies that are going on and collaborating with researchers. Our belief right now is that our drinking water is not likely to be a major source of microplastics, to a large extent because we have well-protected watersheds, but also because we do filter the water, and it's likely that water filtration removes plastic particles like it removes other particles. Standardized methods are really important to be able to compare, apples to apples, one system to another. And there's a lot of interesting work going on right now. Scientists are looking at things like plastic eating microbes, alternatives to plastic, biodegradable plastics. But at the end of the day, what we should really be focusing on is reducing our use of plastics and do more and better recycling. All right, so switching gears to fluoridation. Next slide. As long ago as 1940s, there were some clinical trials done in the US around the Midwest area that showed some really significant improvements in dental health when fluoride was added to the drinking water. These early studies showed as much as 50% reduction in cavities when water is fluoridated. Pretty compelling results. On the West Coast, San Francisco and Antioch were the first systems in California to begin adding fluoride to the water. That was in 1952. And East Bay Mud has been fluoridating since 1976 after a vote of our public. Next slide. Much more recently, 1995, there was a bill passed in the California legislature that required large systems, those serving more than 10,000 people, to add fluoride if money was available. Community water fluoridation is compelling for the main reason that everyone receives the benefits, especially those from marginalized communities who have less access to dental care. And today it's estimated that more than 200 million Americans receive fluoridated water. Fluoride does have health impacts. That's why we add it, and they're both good and bad. And it's really important to make a distinction between high concentrations and low concentrations. Fluoride is clearly harmful at high concentrations. This graph over here just shows kind of relative standards. There's a federal maximum level of 4 milligrams per liter. That's that first bar. In California, our maximum level is half of that, 2 milligrams per liter. And the amount recommended for community water fluoridation is 0.7, so even less than half of that. And that's where we're at. So our level is about 0.7 milligram per liter. At high concentrations, and those numbers tend to be like in the 5 to 10 range, really high concentrations, there is documented damage to bones and joints. It is really bad for you, and it's somewhat less high concentrations. There are other more subtle effects, neurological and cognitive effects that have been documented at somewhat lower concentrations. But at the very low concentrations, like where we use community water fluoridation, fluoride has beneficial effects. It makes your teeth stronger, there are fewer cavities, and poor dental health is linked to other problems like cardiovascular effects, pain, poor school performance have all been linked to poor dental health. And community water fluoridation is super cost effective in comparison to dental intervention. Next slide. So the way we do it here at East Bay Mud, we purchase fluoride in bulk, and we have really stringent quality criteria. All the material we use is tested and certified for use in drinking water. It's added to the water at all of our treatment plants, and all of our treatment plants have operators present 24/7, 365, monitoring all of our processes, including fluoridation. And we also have specialized maintenance staff, mechanics and electricians and instrument techs that are there all the time and on call after hours to respond to any issues. All of our treatment plants have continuous analyzers measuring the concentration of fluoride at all times. And then we have a lot of district staff grabbing and analyzing confirmation samples, both at the treatment plants and out in our distribution system to make sure that the levels are within the target range. And then all of that data gets compiled into reports that we send to our regulatory agency every month to document that we are fluoridating appropriately. Next slide. Even more recently, there's been some legal activity. There was a petition submitted to the Ninth Circuit Court here in San Francisco in 2017 asking EPA to ban fluoridation under TSCA, the Toxic Substances Control Act. Fluoride wasn't previously considered under TSCA. And the court ruled that EPA needs to do that. They need to initiate rulemaking under TSCA. Right now, fluoride is just regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And basically the court told EPA they have to examine potential harm from fluoridation and determine how to respond in the TSCA framework. The court order doesn't dictate what EPA's response needs to be. They just need to consider the risk in the TSCA framework. So they could do something like lowering the MCL under the Safe Drinking Water Act. That's a legit action under the TSCA framework. Or they could ban fluoride. That's another option. There's a lot. They have a really wide range of things they can do under the TSCA framework. So we're just following that case and seeing where that goes. A couple of states have moved ahead. Community water fluoridation was banned in Utah, effective in May of this year, and just this month in Florida. And similar bills have been introduced in Georgia and Kentucky and Nebraska to ban community water fluoridation there as well. Next slide. And then there are 3 case studies I think are relevant in this case. The first one in Alberta, Canada. They began fluoridating there in 1991, and they did cease fluoridation in 2011. And 10 years later, they did a study of second-grade children that showed significantly higher rates of cavities compared to nearby Edmonton, which was fluoridated that whole time. And they voted to reestablish fluoride in their water in this year in 2025. A similar thing happened in Windsor, Ontario. They have practiced fluoridation for more than 50 years. They stopped in 2013. And in 2018, a study there showed tooth decay increases among Windsor children requiring urgent care. So these are basically dental problems that weren't just basic fillings. These are kids that are showing up in urgent care, increased by 51%. And so their city council voted to reinstate fluoridation in 2019. And then the last one is in Juneau, Alaska. I wasn't able to figure out when they started fluoridating, but they stopped in 2007. In 2018, there was a study that showed an increase in necessary dental work in children, basically triggered significant increases in their Medicaid costs. And then another study in 2021 that showed significantly higher rates of cavities compared to Anchorage, which is fluoridated. So I show these because there are studies kind of on both sides. There are studies that show that adding fluoride to water improves dental health, and there are studies that show that taking fluoride out of water leads to poorer dental health in humans. Next slide. So the key takeaways of all of this, watershed protection is super important and helps keep contaminants out of our water. And we're really lucky to have really well protected watersheds. All of our water is filtered, and it's likely that microplastics are removed by filtration. And I'm looking forward to seeing some sample results to demonstrate that. Drinking water is not a significant source of PFAS. Our drinking water, not a significant source of PFAS or microplastics. It's really a global issue. And can be a very localized issue for some drinking water utilities, but we're fortunate not for us. Fluoridation does improve dental health, especially for children and those who don't have access to good dental care. High concentrations of fluoride are harmful, and we work really hard to make sure that our concentrations are appropriate and at the recommended level of 0.7 milligram per liter. And we will continue to follow the science. We communicate with our peers and keep up on all the latest information, and we adjust as needed as new science becomes available, and we'll continue to provide high quality drinking water. That's all I have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Susan, for that. We really appreciate it. So again, if you have questions, feel free to be putting those in the question and answer chat. We are trying to work on answering some of them as we go, and we will be answering more as we end this program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our special guest tonight, Marco Pacheco. So he's joining us from the State Water Board, Division of Drinking Water, and he's going to be providing a regulatory lens on all of these issues. So thanks so much for being here tonight, Marco. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. And yeah, thank you, Susan. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here to present on these topics, specifically about our federal and state regulatory developments related to these in regards to your tap water, and also to be here to address your questions on these topics. Next slide, please. So before we dive into the presentation, I just want to point out a few important terms and acronyms. Some others may appear in the presentation as we move along. These are just the most common terms we'll come across. So on the right side, you'll see the abbreviation for all the various PFAS compounds, which I'll be highlighting in my presentation. And we can take just a few seconds to look at this slide before we move on. Oh, thanks, Catherine. Yeah, next slide, please. So let's first start with how we arrived at the present in terms of where we are in regulating PFAS compounds in our drinking water. This slide shows a timeline from 2012 to 2025 with major national regulatory actions outlined in green on the top and the most significant California developments in blue on the bottom. You can see that there are many steps made at both the federal and state level these last 13 years to get us pretty close to having enforceable limits for PFAS in your drinking water. At the federal level, you can see the progression of the US EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, collecting monitoring data, establishing and updating non-regulatory lifetime health advisory limits, developing an action plan and strategic roadmap towards creating primary drinking water standards for PFAS compounds, to the final rulemaking for regulating 6 PFAS compounds in 2024 that Susan also pointed out too. In California, I'm sorry, go back, Catherine. In California, the State Water Board established its first notification levels for PFAS compounds in 2018. Notification levels are non-regulatory health-based levels similar to the lifetime health advisory limits established by EPA. And across the timeline, you can see the progressive lowering and creation of new notification levels as we get more information about the health risks posed by these compounds. And then during that time span, the State Water Board also issued several general monitoring orders to public water systems for the purpose of gathering data about possible PFAS contamination of drinking water sources throughout California. Next slide, please. So what should we expect next at the federal level in terms of drinking water regulations for PFAS compounds? Well, on May 14th of this year, EPA announced that the agency intends to retain the current drinking water regulations they established in 2024 for only 2 of the 6 compounds, those being PFOA and PFOS. Now, as part of this action, EPA also announced that its intent to extend the PFOA and PFOS maximum contaminant level compliance deadlines that they originally set for 2029 out to 2031, and also look to establish an exemption framework. Additionally, EPA announced its intent to rescind the regulations and reconsider the determinations for the other 4 compounds that are listed here. And US EPA plans to publish the final rule changes this coming fall and also issue the revised rulemaking sometime in the spring. Next slide, please. So what about the status of adopting primary drinking water standards or maximum contaminant levels for PFAS in California? Well, no drinking water contaminant levels have been established in California to address PFAS compounds just yet. You may ask, well, why is that? California law requires the contaminant's maximum allowable contaminant level in your tap water to be set as close to its public health goal as technologically and economically feasible, with the primary emphasis being on protecting public health. Those public health goals serve as the basis for the development of maximum contaminant levels in California. So we can't really have an MCL without a PHG being established. The good news is that our California's Office of Environmental Health and Hazard Assessment established public health goals for PFOA and PFOS in April of 2024. And then in May of this year, the State Water Board's Division of Drinking Water requested for them to establish a public health goal for PFHXS. Next slide, please. So what are the next steps for regulating PFAS compounds in California? Well, first, the Division of Drinking Water is currently looking at expanding our statewide general monitoring orders to require all public water systems in California to monitor its sources for PFAS in the coming years, and not just at the sources that we thought to be near areas of contamination. as we targeted under the previous orders. The Division of Drinking Water has also requested that the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment include evaluations on whether PFAS compounds can be grouped together for regulatory purposes based on specific characteristics or features of the chemicals, instead of us continuing to chase and set standards for each individual compound. And despite the rollback of regulations at the federal level, PFAS maximum contaminant level development remains at the very top of the Division of Drinking Water's regulatory priorities, which are mandated by our board. And we intend to push forward on developing drinking water standards for PFAS compounds in California. Next slide, please. Now on to microplastics. Susan discussed the California law that was Senate Bill 1422, passed in 2018, and the actions that the State Water Board is required to complete under that law. At the federal level, US EPA is actively researching microplastics and their potential effects on human health and the environment. They have not yet established specific regulations or monitoring programs for microplastics in drinking water. Next slide, please. So what are some of the next steps for regulating microplastics in California? So as Susan outlined, there's still 2 points under the law that the Division of Drinking Water is working to address. That would be the testing and gathering the monitoring data. As Susan mentioned, the sampling protocols are still being refined. We're working with researchers in the regulated community to establish reliable sampling protocols, and we need to standardize those in order to have confidence in the samples that are being delivered to our labs. So what about the health-based guidance levels portion of the law? Well, the reality is that we need more reliable monitoring data to assess exposure risks from drinking water sources before notification levels can be recommended. So it's going to take a lot more time and research and data collection before we can even project a timeline for establishing primary drinking water standards for microplastics in California. Next slide, please. And last, to touch on the federal and state regulations and recent actions related to community water fluoridation. Next slide. So how is community water fluoridation regulated in the United States? Well, first, the federal government does not require community water systems to fluoridate their drinking water supplies. The United States Public Health Services has been making recommendations on community water fluoridation since 1962, with their current recommendation being a delivered fluoride concentration in tap water of 0.7 milligrams per liter or parts per million to maximize oral health benefits like preventing cavities, while also minimizing potential harms like dental and skeletal fluorosis. The U.S. Public Health Service recommendation is science-based with extensive peer review from other federal agencies, external experts, and researchers. And Susan highlighted the difference between the federal and state maximum contaminant levels and the U.S. Public Health Service recommended level in her previous slides. Next slide, please. So how is fluoridation regulated in California? Susan mentioned the California Fluoridation Act, which was passed in 1995. This law also gave the Division of Drinking Water authority to establish regulations for fluoride. Those regulations were established in 1998 under Title 22 California Code of Regulations. They include rules for the Division of Drinking Water to enforce the minimum and maximum allowable concentrations of fluoride, requirements and procedures for maintaining proper concentrations, rules for regular reporting requirements to the state, and also requirement for fluoridating systems to develop contingency plans. And those address possible overfeeds, including investigation procedures, shutdown procedures, corrective actions, and public notification procedures. Next slide, please. So what's some of the latest news? Susan discussed some of the recent legal activities surrounding community water fluoridation, and there's just one other development I wanted to touch on. US EPA announced earlier this year that they would be reviewing new scientific data presented in a National Toxicology Program report from August of 2024, which concluded with moderate confidence that fluoride exposure above 1.5 milligrams per liter is associated with lower IQ in children. The report also concluded that more research is needed to understand the health risk associated with exposure to lower fluoride concentrations. US EPA is committing to conduct a thorough review of these findings and additional peer-reviewed studies to prepare an updated health effects assessment for fluoride that will inform any potential revisions to US EPA's current fluoride drinking water standard of 4.0 milligrams per liter. Next slide, please. And lastly, I just want to provide some links to the Division of Drinking Water's program web pages. Here you can find the latest news and updates on these 3 topics and related regulatory developments. Next slide. And that's my presentation. Thanks, you all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Marco. Really appreciate your time and being able to have the statewide perspective and the regulatory perspective. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our last speaker tonight. So we've talked a lot about drinking water and common questions that we get about drinking water. So we're going to turn it around and talk about, instead of the water that we drink, the water that we flush down the toilet or our drains, and that ends up in the San Francisco Bay, and how we make sure that that water is clean and safe as well. So I'm going to be turning it over to Amit Mutsuddy, who is our Director of Wastewater at EBMUD, for our next presentation. Let's see here. Let's get you queued up here. All right, here you go.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm glad to take this opportunity to talk about wastewater, my favorite topic. So you heard a lot about PFAS. PFAS, ubiquitous, it's everywhere. It's even in our blood. So then what happens is it is going to end up in wastewater. And that's what we have seen. Next slide. So just a little bit of a chemistry. I didn't want to repeat all the PFAS, perfluoride alkylate substances, and all the family of PFAS that are out there. But what makes them forever, just wanted to emphasize here, you could see it's the long carbon chain along with fluoride that makes them very durable. That makes them what it call it, the forever, the title comes from. And I've heard some literature that they can last anywhere from hundreds to multiple hundreds of years, or maybe thousands of years, to completely degrade. Hence the name forever chemicals. Another thing is you mentioned that there are thousands of chemicals. The latest count I see from the EPA is 14,000. Next slide. So we have tested PFAS in influent, effluent, and biosolids to define what they are. Influent is the sewage that enters into our treatment plant. Effluent is what gets out of our after the treatment process and goes into the bay and to the recycled water system. And biosolids, it's what gets produced after the solids get separated from the sewer, and then we go through the solids treatment and what gets sent out for various land application and composting. So one important point to note, there are about 37 wastewater treatment plants around the San Francisco Bay. They all send their treated wastewater into the San Francisco Bay, and which is not a source of drinking water for any of the water agencies around the Bay Area. Next slide. So we did test water in the PFAS in wastewater, influent and the effluent. So before I start digging into this, it's a kind of a complex analysis that I wanted to make sure you are able to follow. So the smallest bubble on the left-hand side diagram you see is PFCA. It includes the most common, the PFAS family of the chemicals. Then in our analysis that we did along with the 37, we collaborated with all the 37 wastewater treatment plant, and we worked with the San Francisco Estuary Institute to target a wide variety of PFAS chemicals, and we targeted about 40 of them. And they also recognized there are oxidizable PFAS, that is called TOP, total oxidizable precursors. What happens is these precursors are also present in the wastewater, and when the wastewater goes through the different treatment process, they also transform into the target group of PFAS or the known PFCAs, and they show up. Hence, you see the graph that what we have plotted in median of all the numbers of the concentrations which is nanograms per liter or parts per billion, the parts per trillion, I'm sorry, it's in the influent, but you see if you include the TOP, it is much higher. But that's why you see the numbers in the effluent in some of the analysts to be higher. It does not mean that we are producing it. It means the precursors have gone through the transformation and ends up in our effluent. But these numbers in parts per trillion again. Next slide. The next one we have also measured is our biosolids. And this also includes the median value for all the 37 treatment plants. And the sum of the analytes is on the left-hand side is smaller. And it also includes the TOP. Just for comparison, I just wanted to include these numbers here. You can see that what we can be exposed to the household dust, and the cosmetics, and even food packaging numbers are so much higher than what we are seeing in our wastewater, effluent, influent, and biosolids. Another thing I want to point out in this graph, the second graph to the right, is the different level of PFAS in biosolids. So the biosolids, these triangles and circles, it presents the levels detected from various plants, biosolids composites, and also shows you the national action level, not national, actually, it's for New York and I believe it's Michigan, have come up with this action level for biosolids application for land applications and composting. So between 20 parts per billion or nanograms per gram and 100, what they call it is a action level for notification. They have some limitation on what those biosolids can be used for. And beyond 100, they restrict land application completely. Other states have not developed such levels yet, but one thing I want to point out, most of our levels are below the 20 parts per billion. Next slide. So there are ways to treat and remove PFAS from wastewater. One of the more popular ones is emerging is granular activated carbon absorption, but it's not as effective as removing for the short chain PFAS. Short chain PFAS is less than 7 carbon, I believe. Then there's ion exchange, and then there is membrane. These are also membrane can include reverse osmosis process, but these can also subject to fouling. You know, they can be frequent maintenance for getting plugging, and also cake formation. All of these processes are very, very expensive, and still the total capital cost and O&M cost is still in the development stage. Biosolids, there is another, there's a much higher level, and if you want to dispose and, if you want to remove them, the only way to get rid of them is through thermal transformation. So incineration, pyrolysis, and gasification. As you can see from the names, these are all high energy intense process, means very high capital cost and very high O&M cost. So I found a reference in the web, which is the Minnesota Department of Water Pollution. They have published a report on the PFAS removal cost. And then it ranged from 2.7 million to 18 million per pound of PFAS removal. By comparison, it only takes about $50 to $1,000 to buy a pound of PFAS. Next slide. Good news, there are a lot of regulations are in play in California to actually target the main source of these chemicals. They're targeting, as you heard, they're in textiles, they're in cosmetics, juvenile products, food packaging. They are also in cookware, dental floss, and all these laws are in effect, and they go into effect in different timelines. So you can have these numbers, and you can look up these bills for more details, and they're all available for research if you want to know more in the website, in the California state legislation website. Next slide. There are tons of resources for PFAS because it's such a popular subject and created a lot of public interest. The first one I would point to is Baywise. The title, you could search the PFAS uninvited guest. There's EPA PFAS resources are enormous. They have a lot of information. You can get all the information about different researches happening, different risk level they have identified, and different guidelines. Everything is in there. Then there's State Water Board PFAS website. The next one is PFAS Central. This is my favorite one. You can find a lot of information in here. This is meant for general public, and also have a PFAS-free product guide, which I personally found really helpful. Then you have quick fact sheet in California Association of Sanitation Agencies, also known as CASA. And then I mentioned the Bay Area Clean Water Agencies, the BACWA PFAS documents, all the PFAS studies, that the documents and diagrams and the numbers I've shown you, they are actually from BACWA PFAS studies. And you can find all the details, different phases of the studies on the BACWA website. I also want to mention two names on the academics. One of them is from the University of Washington, Dr. Sally Brown. She frequently writes fighting the misinformation about biosolids and PFAS, that articles that have been in the news media lately. And I find her information very educational and very easy to follow. She kind of breaks down all these different nuances of biosolids and PFAS issues. Then you have another one I want to mention is University of Arizona, Dr. Ian Pepper. He is doing a research on National Collaborative PFAS project. His phase 1 is primarily focusing on PFAS levels in biosolids land application and the levels of PFAS in those lands and those areas. And the second one, his phase of his study is going to focus on the crop uptake of PFAS biosolids that has PFAS that has been land applied for agricultural use. Next slide. So the key takeaways: PFAS is everywhere, and wastewater plants are not the source for PFAS. And treatment technologies for removal of PFAS is very, very expensive, and they're still evolving. Levels detected in wastewater effluent and biosolids from various wastewater treatment plants are lower than national average and much lower than household products. And I want to repeat this one again: avoid using products containing PFAS, and you can reference back to the PFAS Central list, which is very helpful. Next slide. I think that's the end of my presentation.
Wonderful.
That I'm ready for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Amit. Thank you again. So at this time, I remind you, we've been taking questions as we go. We've been trying to answer some of them through the chat, but then we've also flagged some that we've seen multiple people asking or that have come up before, that we were flagging to sort of ask our panelists right now. So the first one, and it seems like this is a common question that we've been getting a lot, is: do home water purification systems get rid of PFAS and microplastics? And can you talk about the benefits of refrigerator filters in general versus standalone filters such as Zero Water? So Susan, I'm going to hand that one to you.
All right. So boy, it's hard to answer a question with you're not supposed to answer a question with a question, but not all filters are the same, and it's complicated. There are some technology, just like in our full-scale treatment plants, there's some technologies in water filters that can remove some things and not others. And there are agencies that test them and certify them for removing particular compounds. So if you want to remove PFAS, you have to find a filter that removes PFAS, and that's probably not going to be the same filter that removes microplastics. Unfortunately, they're different technologies. I like the Water Quality Association, if you're familiar with that. They have a nice, fairly user-friendly website that you can go and look up various home filters that can remove different things. But first, find out if you have that stuff in your water. Don't buy a filter if you don't have that stuff in your water. We test for, as an example, we test for PFAS fairly regularly, and we're fairly convinced it's not there. So personally, I wouldn't buy a filter for PFAS in EBMUD system. So number one, find out if you have it there. And number two, make sure you buy the right filter for the thing that you are looking to remove. And then number three, make sure you maintain it. Filters require maintenance. So, I mean,
Thank
sorry,
you.
I talked right over you.
No, I think you answered
Amit,
it.
did you?
Yeah, I wanted to add to what Susan just informed us. There are some commercially available, like in-home using reverse osmosis filters that they claim can remove PFAS. But the problem is you are removing PFAS, but it's draining back to the sewer system, which we ended up in our treatment plant and into the bay. So it's not the solution. Solution actually should be going after the products that we are using and avoiding those products. That's what I want to emphasize again and again.
Thank you for that. Okay, so the next question we have is, do you currently do microplastics analysis in each treatment process, or you mainly focus on sampling from the inflow water sources?
You want me to take that one?
Sure, yeah, that would be great.
So I'm looking forward to doing that. We have
Mhm.
not yet sampled. We've sampled for PFAS. We have not yet sampled for microplastics. We're waiting for the state to sort out the final steps of the protocol. It's complicated, but depending on how you concentrate the samples and how you take them, you can impact the results. But once the protocols are kind of settled, then yes, we will definitely do that. There's a pilot study that the state's going to do where I think it's all the large surface water plants are included in the monitoring order. I can't remember. Marco, I'm sure knows, but we're part of that group. And so for the first 2 years, we're going to be sampling raw waters, source waters. And then the second two, after some modifications of the protocol, we're going to sample finished waters where you would expect the concentrations to be much lower. So that's going on in the next, I would guess, 4 to 5 years. So TBD, stay tuned.
Awesome.
There'll be more data coming.
Thank you.
Did I
And
get that
Marco
right,
just
Marco?
shared with me, just to go back to the last one, Marco shared with me a really useful fact sheet that talks about different filters. So I'm going to put that in the chat in just a second. Okay, so the next question, what if the EPA says you should not put fluoride in the water? Will you continue to put fluoride in the water? Do we expect significant amount of deregulation in areas of water safety based on reduced federal funding of the EPA? So those many different questions, but I think you got kind of the point of like what are we expecting with the current administration and what's going on with the EPA and what really would sort of be the driver of us stopping putting fluoride in the water.
You want me to take that one?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So we're gonna follow what we do right now. We're gonna follow the data. Basically, we're gonna do what is demonstrated to be effective, and right now that is adding fluoride to the water. Then we're not going to violate the law. If there really was a change in the law, we would follow the law. We're not gonna break the law. I know that they're two conflicting things, but that's the reality. We have to obey the law. That's part of our job as well. So we have, in fact, Marco and I have talked about this before. What would it take for EBMUD to stop fluoridating? There are steps we could go through. We would have to declare that we didn't have any money to pay for it. We would have to ask for money from the state, and the state would have to declare they didn't have money to pay for it. And then we would probably have to have another vote of our public, because our public voted to start fluoridating. So they would probably need to vote to stop. So we couldn't legally just turn it off tomorrow, but if our customers voted for that, we would probably do, we would have to do that. We are serving the public. That's what our job is.
Okay, thank you. So Susan and Amit, both of you. So we've touched on the fact that for our drinking water, we don't need the technology at our treatment plants to remove PFAS at this time, and we don't know yet if filtration is removing microplastics, but we are hopeful. And then Amit, we're not currently removing PFAS from wastewater. What does that technology look like, and what other agencies have that in place, and would that be something we'd look at in the future? That's a question for both of you. So I'll start with Amit from the wastewater side.
So none of the wastewater treatment plants that I know of remove PFAS or microplastics currently. The current process cannot remove them. The only known one that can remove effectively from wastewater is reverse osmosis that I could say, and also activated carbon, but I haven't seen them installed for wastewater treatment plant. Reverse osmosis can do it, but reverse osmosis needs pre-treatment, like you have to push it through microfilters first. So it's a step by step. And then you have to get rid of the reverse osmosis process has a waste. It has, reverse. You can imagine one is pushing through, but then there is a reverse osmosis concentrate that comes out, and that will have the PFAS. And it's very, very expensive to remove that little amount of PFAS from wastewater. So our goal is to target source control. Source control is the way to go.
Mhm. All right, thank you. Susan, what about from a drinking water perspective?
Yes, I can't echo enough what Amit just said about source control. So as you noted, we're fairly confident that the filtration process will remove microplastics, so we're not terribly worried about that. If we were to have an increase in PFAS coming into the raw water in our treatment plants, we would in all likelihood do something like what they did in Wilmington, where they basically added another process at the end after all of the pre-treat, but would then become pre-treatment steps. So in Wilmington, they added activated carbon. There are also ion exchange filters that can remove certain PFAS, but not all of them. So we would need to study, these compounds, they're not all the same, and they have varying degrees of effectiveness in removal. But in all likelihood, it would be some additional process post our regular filtration that we would have to install if we needed it.
Okay, great.
Fingers crossed we don't have to.
Okay, I think we have time for just a couple more questions. So Marco, I'm actually going to sort of ask you that same question, but from the state perspective of sort of like, what are some of the trends we're seeing in current regulations? Are you expecting big changes, and sort of how are you preparing for that?
On the PFAS side, I mean, if we're looking at overall, number of systems or number of treatment systems that have gone in to date, I can give you a number that's about in the 100 range. Water systems have already, ahead of even having federal regulations or state regulations in place, they're already tackling the problem of trying to remove PFAS from the treatment systems, and they're using those technologies that Susan referenced, ion exchange, specifically targeting PFAS compounds, or even granular activated to filter out some of these compounds. There's even some novel absorbents. There's continual research going on that that's looking for different ways to target these different compounds, or at least removing a large mass of them. So there's continually ongoing research trying to address the treatment aspect of it. And of course, as we're looking at developing regulations, once we get this health risk information, when we get those public health goals established, our goal is to look at treatment and understand, when we're trying to establish a maximum contaminant level, is how close can we get to that PHG, where the treatment methods that we're using, that's widely available and the best available technologies, how good are those, and how economically feasible when we're looking at treatment costs on these water systems, and then and you, the consumer, is that something that's affordable to get down to that meeting that health target. And then from the microplastic side, I mean, there's, until we get monitoring going, there's just a lot to be found out about what we're seeing in the source waters in California.
All right, thank you. Well, we are just right about at time. I just want to note that I just answered a question. I don't have a chat feature, so I just answered a question about filtration and linked that fact sheet that Marco had submitted from the EPA. I'll also make that available on our website at eastbaymud.com/Water Wednesday. So we are right at 7. I want to thank our speakers tonight for being here. These all are questions that are on everybody's mind. We see the headlines, and everyone is certainly interested and concerned. So I really appreciate you being here to address these questions tonight. For everyone else, thank you for being here. This was recorded. It will be available at eastbaymud.com/Water Wednesday. Usually takes us about 1 week to get it up online. It's also available on our YouTube site as well. And we hope that you'll join us next month on August 20th at 6 p.m. same time. We're going to be having a guest speaker talking about firescaping and how you can be landscaping your home with using drought tolerant plants, of course, to protect against fire. So more to come on that. And with that, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate it. And everyone have a good night. All right, thanks.